Hey everyone, and welcome back to Stronger Minds, Stronger Men, the show where we dive into men's mental health, healing, and the stories that make us who we are. I'm your host, Austin, and I appreciate you turning in today. So, today we're talking about something that a lot of us carry without even realizing it: how the way we were raised affects how we deal with emotions, or more specifically, how it taught us to not deal with them. A lot of us grew up hearing things like man up, don't cry, or just suck it up. Or maybe we didn't hear anything at all. Maybe we just watched the men around us keep everything bottled up. And we assumed that that's just how it's supposed to be. That silence can be just as loud as words when you're a kid trying to figure out what's okay to feel. And that kind of upbringing leaves a mark. It teaches us to push our feelings down, to stay quiet when we're hurting, and to pretend everything's fine, even when it's not. But the thing is, those habits don't just disappear. They follow us into our adulthood, into our relationships, our work, our health. So in this episode, we're going to talk and take a closer look at what and where that emotional suppression starts, why it sticks around, and how we can start to break it and break out of it. So let's get into it. All right. Before we really dig into the deeper stuff, let's start with the basics. What is emotional suppression, and why does it actually matter? So, emotional suppression in simple terms is when we push down or avoid expressing what we're really feeling. It's that moment when something upsets you, but instead of showing it, instead of saying it, hey, that hurt, or even just letting yourself feel it, you swallow it. You brush it off, you put on that face and act like everything's cool. And maybe you even convince yourself you're fine. But deep down, you're really not. Now, a lot of us learn to do it and do that at a young age. Sometimes it was directly taught, like being told boys don't cry or stop being so sensitive. Other times it was more subtle, just watching the people around us avoid emotions altogether and picking up the idea that feelings are inconvenient, it's weak, or they're just not welcome at all. But here's something important. Emotional suppression is not the same as emotional regulation. That's a big distinction. Emotional regulation is actually a good thing. It's the ability to feel your emotions, understand them, and then respond in a way that's healthy and balanced. It's like being able to say, yeah, I'm angry right now, but I'm not going to lose it. I'm going to take a breath, step back, and figure out what I need. That's a skill that's emotional intelligence. But suppression is pretending those emotions aren't even there. It's pushing them down so hard that you either explode later or you just carry that weight around quietly, hoping it disappears. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. And when we suppress for too long, it catches up to us. That's where the cost really shows up, emotionally, physically, and in our relationships. Let's start with mental health. Long-term emotional suppression is linked to higher levels of anxiety and depression. It makes sense, right? When you're constantly pushing down what you feel, you're basically trapping all that emotional energy inside. It doesn't go away, it builds up. It turns into racing thoughts, restlessness, and even in your chest, you can't quite explain. And over time, it can just drain you mentally and emotionally. Then there's the physical side. The body keeps score always. chronic suppression has been tied to stress related issues like high blood pressure, digestive problems, tension, headaches, and even a weakened immune system. Your nervous system is basically stuck in this constant low grade state of fight or flight. And that's not even something your body's built to handle 24/7. And we can't ignore that impact it has on relationships. When we don't express what we're feeling, when we bottle things up, the people around us can't connect with us. It creates distance, misunderstandings, resentment. Sometimes we explode out of nowhere, and people are left confused because they had no idea we were even upset, or we became emotionally unavailable, even if we don't mean to. That's how relationships start to erode. Not because we don't care, but because we never learned how to show it in a healthy way. So, yeah, emotional suppression might feel like a short term solution, but long term, it takes a toll. And the hard part is, a lot of us didn't even know we were doing it. It was just normal. But the good news is, once we do recognize it, we can start doing the work to change it, to feel things without judgment, to express ourselves without shame. And that's what this episode is all about. Taking a closer look at how we get here and how we start to shift. With that, it's not just about not crying, it's about being taught that having an emotion makes you weak or less of a man. All right, let's talk about something that sits at the root of how we learn to deal with emotions or not deal with them: parenting styles. The way we were raised, the environment we grew up in, the message we get from our caregivers, the emotional climate of our homes, all of that shapes our emotional development in a big way. And psychologists usually break parenting down into four main styles: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and neglectful. So let's start with authoritarian parenting. This is the way and the thought process of my way or the highway kind of style. It's strict, rigid, high on rules, but low on emotional warmth. There's not much room for negotiation, questioning, or expressing feelings. If you got upset as a kid in this kind of environment, you might have heard things like stop crying or suck it up. Not because your parents didn't care, but because they believed discipline and control were the priority. And in that kind of environment, emotions were often seen as distractions or even weakness. Then there's authoritative parenting, and this one's considered the healthiest overall. It still has boundaries and rules, but it's balanced with warmth, communication, and emotional support. If you are upset, an authoritative parent might say, I see you're frustrated. Let's talk about it. You're still being held accountable, but your feelings aren't dismissed. You're being taught how to regulate emotions, not suppress them. Huge difference. Now, permissive parenting, on the other hand, is all warmth and very little structure. The parents are lenient, maybe even overly indulgent. Kids might feel loved, but they often don't learn how to manage their emotions in a grounded way. There aren't many boundaries, so emotional outbursts might go unchecked, and kids can grow up struggling to handle frustrations or disappointment in a healthy way. And then there's neglectful parenting, probably the most damaging. This is when child's emotional and physical needs are consistently unmet. There's little involvement, little connection, and the message here is often silence. Not because the child was told directly to suppress their emotions, but because no one was there to respond at all. That kind of emotional void can leave deep scars feeling like your feelings don't matter, or worse, that you don't matter. Now let's layer in the messages boys in particular tend to receive, regardless of parenting style. A lot of us, especially growing up as boys, were told things like stop crying, man up, don't be soft, act like a man. It didn't matter if we were 5 or 15. We were being told that showing emotion was something to be ashamed of, that if we hurt, we had to hide it, that vulnerability made us less of a man. And those messages stick. They follow us into adulthood, and suddenly we're men who don't know how to grieve, or how to express love, or how to admit we're struggling because we were taught not to. But it gets even more announced when you bring in cultural, generational, and racial differences. In a lot of cultures, especially immigrant households, communities of color, or families with strong traditional roots, emotional expression was seen as a luxury. Survival was the priority. Parents might have been dealing with trauma, poverty, systematic pressures, or just doing the best they could in a world that didn't give them much room to feel. In those homes, strength often meant silence. Emotions were suppressed not because they didn't exist, but because they couldn't afford to surface. And generationally, let's be real, our parents, and definitely our grandparents, didn't grow up in a world that talked about emotional intelligence or mental health. They were handed their own set of survival tools, and emotional suppression was often one of them. So if they didn't model emotional expression, it wasn't necessarily because they didn't care, they just simply didn't know how to. That brings us to role modeling, which is one of the most powerful teaching tools in any home. If you grow up with a father who never talked about his feelings, who was always seemed fine no matter what, you probably learned to do the same. If your mother handled stress by bottling it up until she broke down behind closed doors, you might have learned that emotions should be hidden. Even if no one said anything directly, you were watching. We all were. So when we talk about emotional suppression, we're not just talking about what was said, we're also talking about what was shown. And I want to take a moment here for you to reflect on that in your own life. When was the first time you remember being told, either with words or through someone's actions, to hide what you're feeling? Was it a parent telling you to stop crying in public? Was it the way someone rolled their eyes when you said you were scared? Was it silence? No one acknowledging how upset you truly were. What did that moment teach you? And more importantly, are you still carrying that lesson with you now? Take a second to really sit with that. Maybe even pause this and jot it down, because those moments, they were a lot of our emotional habits began. And here's the thing. None of this is about blaming our parents or our caregivers. It's about understanding that environment we were shaped in so we can decide what to carry forward and what to leave behind. Because once we see where the patterns started, we get to choose differently. We get to feel differently. And if we are raising kids or even just showing up for the people around us, we get to model something healthier. We'll dive into that in a minute. But first, just sit with that reflection. We'll be right back. Let's talk about what happened when we grow up without the tools to express what we feel, especially when it comes to relationships. Because emotional suppression doesn't just live inside of us, it shows up in how we connect or don't connect with the people we care about most. One of the biggest things I hear, and honestly something I've lived myself, is how hard it can be for men to express emotions in relationships, romantic ones, friendships, even family. We want to show up, we want to connect, but there's this invisible wall between what we feel and what we're able to say. And more often than not, what slips through that wall is anger. Because let's be real, anger is one of the few emotions society has deemed acceptable for men to express. We're allowed to get pissed off. We're allowed to raise our voice. We're allowed to be frustrated, short tempered, and even aggressive. And somehow that still fits the man box. But sadness, shame, fear, loneliness, we're often taught to keep that stuff locked away. So what happens? Everything else gets funneled into this thing called anger. We're not just mad because someone cut us off in traffic. We're mad because we've been carrying around stress, rejection, disappointment, unspoken grief. And it all explodes in this little moment. This little moment. Or worse, it slowly poisons us and poisons the way we communicate with the people who are closest to us. And here's where it gets trickier. Even in our most intimate relationships with our parents, our close friends, family, vulnerability can feel like a foreign language. We want to open up, but we don't know how. Or we fear that might happen, and what would happen if we do? Will I look weak? Will I be judged? Will they pull away if I show what I'm really feeling? So instead of opening up, we retreat. We shut down emotionally. We say, I'm fine, even when we're not. We go quiet when things get hard. We turn inward, or we turn to distractions. And those distractions can be coping mechanisms. One thing is workaholism, throwing ourselves into our job because at least there we feel useful. We can avoid emotions if we just stay busy enough. Then there's substance abuse. A few drinks to take the edge off becomes a habit, we don't talk about it. It numbs the things we don't want to feel. Then there's the emotional shutdown. We become unavailable, disconnected, and even cold. Not because we don't care, but because we don't know how to be emotionally present. And here's where the damage creeps in. Not just in how we feel, but in how the people who love us experience us. Partners start to feel they're talking to a wall. Friends stop checking in because they feel like we're never really there. Kids pick up on our distance, even if we think we're hiding it well. And then we wonder why we feel so isolated, why we feel misunderstood, why our relationships don't feel fulfilling or safe. But the truth is, connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires emotional language. If we never learned how to name our emotions, how to sit with them, talk about them, release them, then how can we expect to connect on a deeper level? There's a quote I want to bring into this moment. It says, if you never taught how to talk about sadness, shame, or fear, your only option is silence or rage. Let that sink in for a second. If sadness has no outlet, it turns into frustration. If shame has no name, it festers and becomes anger. If fear has no voice, it controls us in silence or it lashes out. So many men are walking around with years, even decades, of unspoken pain. Not because they're cold or unfeeling, but because they were never taught how to speak it. The only emotions they were handed permission for or anger and silence. And listen, this isn't about blaming anyone. Most of us inherited this emotional toolbox from generations before us. It's not about shame, it's about awareness. Because once we realize that we weren't taught, we can decide what we want to learn. We can start practicing vulnerability, not perfectly, but gradually. We can start using words for what we're feeling, even if it's uncomfortable at first. We can start having real conversations with our partners, our friends, our kids that say, hey, this is hard for me, but I want to try. Because the ability to express emotions, especially the tough ones, is not weakness, it's strength, it's courage, it's connection. And if we want healthier relationships, we've got to start within. So here's something I'd encourage you to reflect on as we close out this section. When was the last time you felt something deeply? Sadness, fear, shame. And you either silenced it or turned it into anger instead. What might have happened if you had felt safe enough to express the original emotions? All right, let's talk about the other side of the emotional suppression, the healing side. Because, yeah, a lot of us grew up learning to bury our emotions. But the good news is, just because we were taught something doesn't mean we have to keep carrying it. It starts with unlearning and becoming aware. That might sound simple, but it's actually one of the most powerful steps we can take. Just realizing, hey, I shut down every time I'm upset, or I've never been able to say I'm scared out loud. That awareness is where change starts. Because once you can see the pattern, you can start to interpret it. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to get curious. Why do I react this way? Where did I learn this emotion isn't safe to express? What would happen if I gave myself permission to feel it anyways? That's where the real work begins. And for a lot of people, myself included, that work starts in therapy or in support groups. Now I know therapy still carries a stigma in some communities, especially for men. We're told to just tough it out or asking for help is weak. But honestly, therapy is one of the strongest things you can do. It's not about being broken, it's about finally understanding your inner world. It's about sitting with someone who isn't judging you, isn't trying to fix you, but is helping you unpack years of stuff you've been carrying on your own. And support groups, whether it's a men's group or a mental health circle, or even a small online community, there is so much healing in knowing you're not alone, that other people feel this too, that other men are trying to break the cycle just like you are. And one of those tools that therapy and support groups help build is emotional literacy. Just the ability to identify and name what we're feeling. You'd be surprised how many of us can only name like 3 emotions: happy, mad, or tired. Maybe fine, which lets us be honest, it's not even a real emotion. It's usually just code for I don't want to talk about it. But learning to name your emotion is powerful because when you can name it, you can navigate it. Instead of saying I'm just in a bad mood, maybe it's I'm feeling rejected right now. Instead of I'm pissed, it becomes I'm feeling disrespected, and that's triggering something deeper. That shift gives you clarity. It helps you respond instead of just react. And we don't have to do that alone. That's where safe relationships come in. We all need people, friends, partners, mentors, where we feel like we can be real, where we don't have to armor up, where we can say, man, I'm struggling today, and not worry that we'll be seen as weak or too much. If you've got one person in your life like that, cherish them. If you don't, be open to finding or creating that kind of relationship. Emotional safety is the soil where vulnerability can grow, and we all need that space. Now, if you're a parent or you're thinking about becoming one, this next part is huge. Because the more we do this inner work, the more we get to raise the next generation differently. We get to teach our kids something we maybe didn't learn growing up: how to feel. We get to name emotions out loud. We get to say it's okay to be sad, or it's normal to feel nervous before something big. We get to model what it looks like to apologize when we mess up, to cry when something hurts, to regulate instead of suppress. That's how emotional literacy becomes a legacy. Not just something we build for ourselves, but something we pass on. And that might be the most healing part of all, knowing the cycle stops with us. So, whenever you're at in this journey, whether you're just now becoming aware or you've been doing the work for a while, know this: you're not behind. You're not broken. You're not exactly where you should not be. Let's wrap this up with a little reflection. What's one emotion you find hard to express, and why? Maybe it's sadness, because you were always told not to cry. Maybe it's joy, because it feels vulnerable to be seen when you're happy. Maybe it's fear, because you've always had to be the strong one. Whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email or drop a comment if you're comfortable sharing. This space is here for real talk, not perfection. And just remember, unlearning isn't about getting it all right overnight. It's about making the choice over and over again to feel, to heal, and to grow. Prime example, there was a time not long ago when I was under more pressure than I even knew how to handle. I had just started a new job, a big opportunity, something I really wanted to do well in. But the training process, it was intense. The expectations were sky high, and from the minute I walked in the door, I felt like I was trying to keep up with something I was already behind on. I kept telling myself, you got this. Just push through. Don't complain. Don't show weakness. And that's what I did. Or at least I tried to do. What I didn't do was talk about it. Not to my friends, not to my family, not even to my wife. I kept everything bottled up. Every moment of self-doubt, every time I felt like I wasn't good enough, every night I came home completely drained. I didn't want to stress anyone out. I thought I was protecting the people I loved by carrying it all by myself. Until I couldn't. Eventually, things at work got worse. I couldn't focus the way I needed to. The pressure I was under started affecting my performance. And then the day came, they sat me down and gave me a choice: quit or get fired. It was like the weight of everything I had been carrying finally just crushed me all at once. That morning, the day I was supposed to walk in to work and face that choice, I broke. For the first time, I let it all out. I cried. I told my wife everything. I told her how stressed I had been, how overwhelmed I felt, how scared I was of failing, and how ashamed I felt for not saying anything sooner. And something in that moment that I didn't expect. She didn't look at me like I was weak. She saw me, really saw me. And we connected, not just as partners, but as humans. From that day on, I made a choice I wasn't going to carry everything in silence anymore. When I got another shot at a different job, a fresh start, I approached it differently. I kept her in the loop. Every day, I would tell her how things went. Some days were great. Some days I felt like I didn't belong. And some days I just needed to vent. But I kept talking. And because I kept talking, my emotions didn't build up the way they used to. Because I had space to feel. I had space to breathe. And because I wasn't carrying the weight alone, I was able to show up the way I knew I could. That's what helped me succeed. That's what helped me finally start my career. Not just the job itself, but the choice to stop suffering in silence. We always talk about how men need to be strong, but I've learned that strength isn't about bearing what you feel. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone in. So, all right, let's bring this all together. We've covered a lot today, from how our upbringing shapes the way we handle emotions to struggling many of us face in expressing what we feel. And here's the thing. Yes, our foundation was built by the people who raised us, but we still have the power to rebuild. We are not stuck with this emotional blueprints we were handed as kids. We can choose to learn, to feel, to speak, to heal. Emotions aren't weakness. Let me say that again. Emotions aren't weakness. They're information. They're data. They tell us what matters, what hurts, what needs to be seen or soothed. They are what makes us human. And they're necessary for real connection with others and ourselves. So if you're wondering where to start, keep it simple. Try a small emotional check-in. Maybe you journal for 5 minutes and ask yourself, what did I feel today? And why? Maybe you text a friend and say, hey, I've been holding something in. Can I share it? Maybe you just practice naming what you're feeling without judging it. Small steps matter. One honest conversation, one moment of awareness, one decision to not bottle it up this time. And if this episode resonated with you, if something in here made you stop and think, I've got 2 quick asks. First, share it with someone you care about, someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in this. And second, hit that follow and like button if you haven't already. We've got more honest, raw, healing conversations coming your way, and I'd love for you to be a part of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourselves and keep showing up one emotion at a time.